fortunate ones who get to share 1 month after another. It's the 9th of 12. Good Lord. I'm joined by my friend and brother and co-host without whom we wouldn't do this. As a matter of fact, I remember I didn't apologize last week. The only time we didn't do this show, Wiebe, Boer, and I, let me welcome you first. Wiebe, how are you today? Good morning.
I'm good. Good morning, Femi. How are you doing?
Not bad at all. I mean, I just had that epiphany when I was just about saying, the guy without whom this show would not exist. And then suddenly I remember the 1 week we didn't do the show was a special week for you. You couldn't be around. The show could have gone on.
Yeah.
But, there's nothing like the guy who puts in the work, who does all the background stuff, great ideas, great conversations, great interview questions. Wiebe, Boer.
Yeah.
You should,
and then Femi, you take all the glory, so
Well done, my brother. Well done. Good to see you again.
All right. Likewise.
We promised last week we were gonna come with a big special superhero, and here we are. Wiebe, please do the honors.
All right. So this morning we have a special guest, Ruth Benson-Idahosa. She's the founder and executive director of the Pathfinders Justice Initiative and a former classmate of mine. So Ruth and I have known each other, I think, since we were 10 years old.
No need for details, Wiebe. Please.
So Femi, anything you want to know about, what it was really like when we were kids, this is the person. But we have
The only thing I'm going to say is Ruth, fantastic. For somebody who's known Wiebe, literally all his life, you look so young and fine, and he looks old. Now just thinking of it.
Thank you, Femi. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well,
I'll apologize to you in private.
No problem. Let's jump into it because we have a very, very a difficult but important topic to talk about today. So Ruth, you're a lawyer, an activist, a thought leader, and an expert on modern day slavery, human trafficking in sub-Saharan Africa. Tell us about your background and what led you to this path to focus on such difficult and painful issue.
Well, thanks for having me on, and I think you've already alluded to my age, unfortunately, but I appreciate an opportunity to be here with you. But I grew up, as the eldest daughter of some pretty prominent minister parents, and so like typical Nigerian parents, they gave us two options, right? Either do law or medicine. And that was it. And so my elder brother, said he wanted to be a doctor. I had no idea what being a lawyer was, but I said, well, I'm not doing that. And so I think from my very young childhood, I've always sort of been this outlier in some ways. I've always, felt, I've always looked at the world through a lens of justice. And really, even though I grew up, continued through my life, did the typical journey to practice law. I think one of the things that my parents really mirrored for us was service to humanity, and the idea that a life that's not outpoured for the service of humanity was ultimately wasted. And so, I grew up really seeing my parents do a lot in the community. And so for me, I think, part of what I know I've been called to do is to really create more space for women and girls at the table, right? And so my life is really, about curating that space, ensuring that women have the dignity, are able to have the agency that they should. And so in 2013, I resigned from my partnership at my law firm. And I've been doing this work in Nigeria since. And it's just been, I think, one of the most amazing aspects of my life, because it's really what I love to do. It's really, ensuring that women get to amplify their voices that have been muted in many ways.
Well, Ruth, last week we had here the Honorable Commissioner for Health in Lagos State. And that was just a few days after we heard that he was down with COVID-19. Now, you have survived COVID. So I'm sitting here and wondering what your experience was like. And very importantly, well, how are you now?
Well, thankfully I'm alive, and but I've been referring to it as malaria on steroids. This was probably the worst experience I've ever gone through, and I'm generally a healthy person, but I really was. It felt like being hit by one of these 18-wheeler Mack trucks, and I was really out for probably about 3 months. I'm trying to recover, from it. And so for me, I think my takeaway from COVID, the gift that it gave me, is really to have more of the sense of urgency about my life and the way that I live it, because there were days when I wasn't sure I was going to wake up the next morning. It was that scary. And so I think now I've come to a place of just having more compassion for people in general, in addition to what I was already doing. But I think it's also made me a real advocate for the reality of what COVID looks like and what it does, and really trying to convince people to take it seriously, because your decisions, your choices all affect me. I was a germaphobe before COVID, and so now I'm even more. I'm one of those people that gets on the plane and you see them wiping down everything, spraying everything, and so I think my daughter thinks I'm going to be a bit worse now, but I think I'm really, really grateful to be alive and to continue to do the work that we do, but also to just let people know how serious this is and the need to take it that way.
So yeah, thanks Ruth for sharing that. I mean, one of the things that we face, and I think this is very common especially in parts of Lagos, is that there's this feeling like, okay, COVID isn't really real, and if you get it, it's not serious. But someone that's young, healthy, and all that, like you, and you got it, and it was this serious, I think it's very important for people to realize how real this is. So thank you for sharing that. So let's move on to your organization, the Pathfinders Justice Initiative. So I guess it sounds like you started this around 2013, but what is the history and what do you do?
Yeah, well, Pathfinder was actually a nickname that my father gave me when I was younger. Yeah, and he would, from when I was 9, he would call me his Pathfinder, and he would say, no matter where he was in the world, I would always track him down. And so I think when I started thinking about a name for the organization, that really just came to mind, because it's not just who my father called me prophetically, but it's also what we're endeavoring to do for these women and girls, is to really help them find their path out of violence, out of exploitation. And so what we're doing is very quickly just 3 things. First is like influencing the influencers, right? So these are the people who have the power to end trafficking: government, law enforcement, training them, educating, advising them, but holding them accountable, right? Because this is what we pay you to do. As citizens of Nigeria, you work for us, right? And so really, really making those people accountable. The second thing we do is not just speaking truth to power, but speaking truth to the seemingly powerless, right? So these are the community leaders, the community itself, educating them on the realities of sex trafficking, the realities and the implications of violence against women, but ensuring that the interventions that we actually carry out are powered by their voices. And so that's really the awareness raising aspect of what we do. But the third, I think, is what we're probably most known for, which is really providing excellent care and service to survivors of sex trafficking in Nigeria.
So let's talk self-trafficking now. I mean human trafficking. Share with us some of the details around this painful situation in Nigeria, and why you consider it such a big problem, because you are focusing on it and fighting it with all your might.
Right. It's globally it's a $150 billion industry, right? But the route from West, East, and North Africa to Europe, that smuggling route generates about $150 million annually. In Nigeria, it's a big issue, because I think most people tend to think of trafficking as just sex trafficking, but the reality is that forced labor is trafficking. When you see these children on the streets begging, that's trafficking. Child brides is a form of trafficking. Child soldiers, and so we have all of these issues in Nigeria. But according to the statistics within the country itself, there are probably about 1.3 million victims of trafficking. I think that number is grossly underestimated, because I don't think certain categories are included. So when you think of what we refer to as house help, right? Those could potentially be situations of trafficking as well. And so we're dealing with this issue. It's in our face every single single day within the country itself. But I think what we're infamously known for is really the trafficking and smuggling of migrants through this unsafe way when they go from Nigeria to Niger to Libya, and then you see them on the boats trying to cross over to the Mediterranean. And so I think what that really shows to me is that these, and what the data shows from our survivors is that these people aren't necessarily leaving because they've given up on Nigeria. They're really leaving because they feel like Nigeria has given up, on them.
Wow. Okay. So let's take this a little deeper. So with all of these issues, so how does your organization address it? I mean, I guess you can't, if it's 1 million people and it's such a huge issue, you probably can't cover all of these areas.
Right.
So how do you address it? And then who are your key partners in doing this?
Well, again, I mean, we can't work as a silo. And so in that regard, our specific focus is on sex trafficking. Nigeria is known particularly as a hub of sex trafficking in my home state of Edo State. And so a lot of our focus on ending it and, designing interventions is really focused in that particular area of the country. But I think because we can't do this on our own, we partner with NAPTIP, which is the Nigeria's anti-trafficking agency, with the Edo State Task Force Against Human Trafficking, with various CSOs, with various organizations, in an effort to really for everyone to bring their share of resources and ideas to the table to try to tackle it collectively.
So let's tie in COVID-19 to your work around human trafficking. So I'm wondering how COVID-19 has made your work even more difficult at this time, and what you feel needs to be done immediately to help people who are caught in the web of human trafficking during this pandemic period.
Well, I think the reality is that, COVID has impacted our work in the sense that because of the lockdown, right, we weren't really able to provide the extensive level of and holistic level of services that we normally do to survivors. It's also, so we ended up having to pivot in the way that we serve our survivors. So we moved our services online. So a lot of connection through WhatsApp and really, doing strategic thinking with our survivors, because many of them had to close their businesses. A lot of donor funding that we had to be readjusted and reallocated towards COVID. And so for me, I think what needs to be done is that Nigeria really needs to restore a sense of hope for people who are on the margins, for the people who work in the informal sector, people who are poor, right? We do have the highest number of we are the poverty capital, right, in the entire world. And a lot of people have lost that sense of hope, because what you saw during the pandemic was that people or in the height of the pandemic, we know we're still in it, but people who had the ability, right, who had a cushion, were not as impacted as the everyday person on the street who had no choice but to get out there to feed on a daily basis. And so I think what our survivors are asking Nigeria to do is really value their lives in the same way that they would value, their own lives or their children's lives, and just give them a sense of validation. And that may require some level of economic support just as a start.
So just a question then for this particular context. So has the pandemic had an impact on the numbers of people trafficked, or did it maybe stop it for a little while, stop the flow? What impact has it actually had on the whole sort of industry, I guess, as you
right yeah I think what we've seen is a lot of in various aspects, a lot of more local trafficking, right? So
okay.
we didn't, there's women who are either being forced into trafficking or voluntarily prostituting themselves on the street because of the desperation of not having the economic resources, right? But the trafficking has also moved online now, and so you see a lot more communication, live streaming sorts of services, and but I think for the thing that we're hearing the most on the ground is that people are certainly planning to leave Nigeria now. I mean, people were already leaving, but the European Union had really done a good job in really stemming the flow of migrants from Nigeria. But as a result of the pandemic, the harsh reality and the economic suffering that many of the people have gone through. What we're hearing now from the ground is that once the borders fully reopen, people are going to start making that deadly journey, once again through Niger and Libya.
All right, just in case you are just joining us, we are having a chat with Ruth Benson-Idahosa. She's the founder and executive director, Pathfinders Justice Initiative. Now, Ruth, I'm going to ask you, hit you with two questions. One is whether indeed you have any unique stories of survivors from your work still that you'd like to share during this COVID period, or maybe just in the aftermath, because we say aftermath because the COVID is still here, but a wee bit of the initial panic has subsided. The other question is, do you have any partnerships with government to help get survivors to return home during this period of the pandemic?
Well, we don't have a particular a partnership. To answer that question first, like I said, we work with NAPTIP, and NAPTIP, being the country's anti-trafficking agency, is really the one who's mandated to bring people back. And so, we have individual partners that we work with outside the country, but because of the lockdown, we haven't been able to actually help people repatriate back to the country. But I think for me, one of the stories that really comes to mind and that keeps me motivated to do this work is we had a survivor a few years ago named Faith, who had been trafficked to Russia and really just treated in the most inhumane way, and was held in slavery, and ultimately ended up developing kidney disease, and came back to started looking for a way to get back to Nigeria. We were able to get her back to Nigeria because at this point her kidneys were failing, and the idea was to say, okay, well, who can we get within the government to really support this young girl? We didn't have a lot of resources as an NGO, even though we had done a little bit of fundraising for her. But she was, in her early 20s at that point in time. I went to the Ministry of Women's Affairs. I went to, to various government agencies, and nobody was able to provide that support. And so for me, I think what that revealed was the gaps within the system, and because people are coming back to the exact same conditions that rendered them vulnerable in the first place. And so for a year and a half, my organization provided support for this young lady, but ultimately at one point, she ended up passing away. And it was such a failure, I think, of government and failure of the country as a whole. And it's something that really stays in my mind to keep me motivated to continue to do this work. But the truth of the matter is that in addition to stories like that, we also have, young women who have returned, repatriated back to Nigeria and have really, really put one foot in front of the other, because the reality is that people just need an opportunity. And so if we can collectively provide that to them, you can see people really, really, really climb and achieve the things that one would never imagine for somebody who has gone through the sort of torture and the hell that our survivors have.
So Ruth, walk us through the process. So like the Faith in Russia, how did you find her? How did she find you? How did she get to Russia to begin with? What's the journey? And then how does it start once you hear from them? Then how do you guys work to bring them back? That's a lot of paperwork and complexity behind it.
Yeah, it's a lot of moving pieces. They're generally, the young women are recruited from Nigeria. Sometimes they're deceived and told that they're going to be nannies. A lot of what we're seeing happening in the Middle East, particularly now. And so this was a few years ago, before Libya became the gateway into Europe. And so Faith was actually flown, and I think one of the gaps that we see is that there's government complicity, because you see, fake passports being created, you see fake visas for school and things like that. So she was under the impression that she was actually going to continue her education in Russia, and she had a young child already in Nigeria who she could not afford to buy malaria tablets for. And so when she was recruited by a trafficker and somebody said, hey, we'll give you this, we'll give you that. So she jumped, to the opportunity to be able to do that. She got to Russia. She was held in slavery for 3 or 4 years. And the reality of what these women go through, and I think I want to make that very clear, is that they're forced to have sex with men, between 15 to 20 men every single day. There's no day off. And so the average woman that we see repatriating back to Nigeria is somebody who has had her body assaulted on an average of 3,000 to 5,000 times in a period of 2 to 3 years. And so by the time they come back to Nigeria, they're really in broken pieces. But what we have partnerships with organizations in 7 other countries. And so Russia is one of them, not with the Russian government, with NGOs that work in these countries. And so they contacted us and said, we have a survivor that would like to get back to Nigeria. We all pooled our resources together, got her back to Nigeria. And that's when, we start to really try to develop what we call our PATH plans, personalized action to healing plans, or rehabilitation plans, to try to get these women back on their feet.
Well, Ruth, you already said you don't have government partnership per se in Nigeria. I was wondering, however, if you get some form of support, the government looking your way and saying, hey, you're doing great. How can we help you? Or how can we make your load light? Is there anything like that? And just before you answer that, is there also any national intervention on human trafficking that you've noticed, the keyword being national, that you might be championing yourself?
Yeah, I think as far as funding is concerned, I mean, it'd be great to be able to get funding directly from the Nigerian government. But I think the reality is that most of the funding that they're allocating, which is minimal compared to the task at hand, is directed towards NAPTIP. Right. And so as a partner of NAPTIP, we don't get any financial support from them, but we do partner with them in helping to improve the system overall for the people that need it. And so there are, various national campaigns. One of ours is Not for Sale. And it's a campaign that we started in 2014. And that's one that's really trying to reach out to the community to get women particularly to understand what their value is and to provide alternatives, right? Because you can't just tell people don't leave Nigeria without actually providing them an alternative of why they should stay, giving them a reason to stay, right? Providing them with whatever gap, filling that gap. Most of the time it's economics. Sometimes people want to get back to school. Some people want to provide for their families and things like that. The example I gave you of Faith was someone who couldn't afford to buy 500 naira malaria tablets for her daughter, right? And if that had been provided, for example, maybe her case might have been different.
So Ruth, before I think Femi's getting ready to kick us off, but before we're done, how can listeners in Lagos? I think in Nigeria, you said your focus is a lot on Edo State, Benin City, where you're from.
Mm-hmm.
But how can listeners in Lagos reach out if they're aware of women who are in the process of being trafficked or trying to get back? I mean, all of this. How do they reach out and how do they connect with you and your organization?
Well, I mean, we have a website, which is Pathfinders JI. So Pathfinders with an S, JI.org. We also have, our office information. You can reach me at Instagram at Find Your Path, FINDYRPATH, or at Pathfinders JI on Instagram or Facebook. But I think, one thing, I don't want people to think, this is such a big problem, I'm paralyzed, like there's nothing I can do. You can certainly volunteer, you can certainly, donate to support the causes that are close to your hearts. And so this is something that we all need to be tackling collectively because, like I said earlier, the same way with COVID, eventually you're going to end up knowing somebody who's affected by it.
Well, Ruth, you are the daughter of a prominent, super popular Nigerian preacher and miracle worker. And you are preaching a totally different message, but no less significant and important. And what you're doing is indeed a miracle. Well done. Thank you for gracing us with your time, and keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Wiebe.
Thank you so much, Ruth.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right.
Wiebe, I was going to hand the baton over to you. You know how we roll towards the end. And by the way, Ruth, thank you for beating Fine Boy Wiebe hands down today. Yeah.
So Ruth, thank you so much.
Yeah.
As a childhood friend, as a sister, I'm just so proud of what you're doing and the voice that you're giving to the voiceless. like Femi said, you come from a very prominent family. You could have chosen a very different path, and all that, but you focus on almost taking on your father's ministry to new areas and to continue to focus on the people who don't have a voice. And so thank you for doing that. And I think, as you've said, in this time of COVID, it's even more important and to do this. And so thank you for the work you're doing. Please continue to do it. Make us proud, and be the person who helps save these people who really have lost so much hope. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks.
Well, Wiebe Boer produces this show, and we do it together. Wiebe, any sneak peek? What can we expect next week?
Well, next week it's somebody that you recommended. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see if your guests are the same quality as mine.
I have an idea. Let us keep it. Have a great week. Great rest of the week, everyone. Wiebe, thank you very much for doing this, and please continue to stay safe.
.3 Nigeria Info. Let's talk.